Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Beat the Big Guys. I'm your host, Sandy Rosenthal. Today, we're going to be talking about something a little different. We have a guest who is actually took on the big guys, actually working with the federal government. And I look forward to talk to. I look forward to having him speak with you. His name is Neil Carman. Hello, Neil.
Hi, Sandy. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. I've been researching your work and it's absolutely amazing. There's some people out there who don't know about you, so I'm going to give them a little short introduction before handing the mic over to you, okay?
Sure.
All righty. Neil Carman is a former state of Texas air pollution investigator of 12 years and now 30 years with the Sierra Club. Plus, Neil is also a former state of Texas whistleblower before leaving to work for the Sierra Club. Well, I hope we get to hear about that. Earlier, Neil says he discovered how the greater environment was a severely polluted mess because he spent part of 1967 at the University of Michigan's Great Lakes Research Center in Ann Arbor, where they had a grant to sample and analyze the Great Lakes. It turns out the lakes were really badly polluted with toxic chemicals, and all natural life forms, all were dead or dying. It was shocking how serious the Great Lakes pollution was, and no such environmental studies degree programs existed then in the universities in 1967. Thankfully, that's changing. But that wake-up call inspired Neil by 1980 to take a regional field office position with the state of Texas, investigating air pollution in West Texas, covering 34 counties. It was eye-opening, he said, to be able to see and smell firsthand how bad the industrial air pollution was in 1980. Neil dealt with citizens complaining about industrial air pollution and went into 200 plus industrial plants a year and dozens of small facilities. What a lot you've done. I can't wait to hear more about it. Over to you,
Okay.
Neil.
Sure. Thank you, Sandy. Yeah, well, 1967 was a huge wake-up call at the University of Michigan's Great Lake Research Center at Ann Arbor. Because in our test tubes and microscopes and so forth, we were seeing a lot of pretty shocking information from the Great Lakes, that they were heavily polluted, like areas around Detroit, the Rouge River, was near the auto factories and their coal-fired power plants. We saw a lot of pollution around the Gary, Indiana, Chicago area from a big U.S. Steel factory, U.S. Steel, and also a refinery by BP, British Petroleum. So I knew growing up, going from Iowa City to Detroit to visit family there, that I would go through Chicago and Gary, Indiana, and it was just really unbelievably bad. You had to roll your windows up. So I knew the air pollution was bad. I knew the water pollution was bad, and yet there were no real environmental studies programs in the late 60s. So I finished a master's and PhD with a lot of chemistry, plant chemistry, but I had a very broad background in biology, molecular biology, genetics, biochemistry. So by 1980, I got a job with the state of Texas Air Pollution Control Agency, and I went out to work in a field office in Odessa, Texas. It's out in the western part of the state. And my first week there was kind of another shocking wake-up call, because I was driving from the south side of the city, near a large inland petrochemical complex with a refinery and chemical and petrochemical plants. And the smell was really bad. And around me were blocks and blocks of poor people. It was obvious that the people living in South Odessa were poor people of color. And yet, when I went into my office the next day to talk about how bad the air pollution was in the south side of Odessa, they said, well, unless people complain, Neil, we really can't do a whole lot about it. So over the years, I began to give my card out to people on the South Side. I got to know some of them, and I encouraged them to call in pollution complaints if it was bothering them outside or inside their homes. And so we began to get complaints, and in the late 1980s, it really kind of hit the fan. Um, we had already had some success against a few other plants that had pollution problems. And now we were going to be looking very carefully at General Tire and Rubbers, Odessa synthetic rubber plant. And they made the synthetic rubber from toxic petrochemicals, 1,3-butadiene, which is a known human carcinogen, and they reacted it with styrene, okay, which is also a form of benzene, vinyl benzene, and the suspected human carcinogen. So the plant was really a mess, and it was old. It was heavily grandfathered. But if people complained, we could write nuisance violations. And so I was talking a lot to the Black mothers and how their kids would be sick on a Sunday or Monday and they would miss several days of school. And there was a large elementary school right across Interstate 20 on the north side, Hayes Elementary Magnet School, and on the south side was General Tire and Rubber's dirty rubber plant. So the teachers were talking about how it had been bad for a long time. So we began to take enforcement action through the violations and the complaints filed by the citizens. And under an attorney general's ruling in Texas in 1980, we could keep the people confidential in terms of their names, their addresses, and their phone numbers. We could only tell the people at General Tire or any plant where we had complaints that citizens in the area had complained about the pollution and that we were investigating them as a potential source of the pollution that triggered the citizens' complaints. Well, we wound up with hundreds of these complaints against General Tire, even though there was a refinery nearby, but it was a very small refinery. It wasn't nearly as bad as General Tire and some other chemical plants. And so I would go into those plants as well and talk to their environmental managers about the complaints that we were getting. And I had to rule them out. And so our team of investigators, which I was kind of the lead person on, would rule out the refinery and the other plants. And then we would say, we find that, in our opinion, it's General Tire that is releasing these chemicals, the styrene, the butadiene, and the smell of this rubber from their dryer processes. And and then I even went up on top of their large dryer process building, and they had a bunch of vents up there, and they were just horrific. And the company didn't like the fact that I was climbing up the vents as best I could and sticking my nose in there. And I got an instant headache. And I said, this is the same thing that I'm smelling along the outside fence area of the plant, this styrene butadiene smell, and from their dryers. And this is what the people in the community are complaining about. So we began to issue violations for citizen complaints, nuisances. We could do that under state law. And so we issued a lot of these, and we got the company into enforcement and to cover some waste pits. But after 2 years, the company decided that I was the problem, that Neil Carman was too aggressive, issuing too many violations. It was the agency, and I simply was an investigator doing my job because of the complaints of the people of color in South Odessa. And I would inform them that we were issuing violations and we were taking enforcement actions. So in 1989, after 2 years of enforcement, the company hired a very powerful lobbyist out of Houston, Texas, named Larry Feldkamp, who's now retired. He was an attorney with a big law firm, Baker Botts, who's a major industry defense firm. And he was just paid to do a job. And that was to get Neil Carman from going into that plant anymore.
And shut him up.
And I had been warned by a General Tire and Rubber employee named Kenneth Scheibel, who's no longer alive. And he was a former Green Beret. He'd been a bodyguard to General William Westmoreland in Vietnam. And so he came into the plant to introduce himself to me and tell me, Neil, the plant is a mess. The workers get cancer. That's part of their retirement, benefit. And he said, so anything you can do in the plant to help, it would be really, really appreciated by the workers. I said, well, Ken, I don't have any OSHA authority. That's the Federal Occupational Safety Health Administration. But if you have some possible referrals for me to handle, I will call up to Lubbock, Texas, and tell the OSHA office that there could be like asbestos violations. They were doing improper, illegal asbestos removal. And OSHA did come down and cite them for a few violations. But anyway, so in a nutshell, 1989, I was removed from the case. The lobbyist that the company hired, and I was warned about this like almost 4-6 weeks in advance by the man in the plant, Mr. Scheibel, that I was going to be taken off the case. They'd hired a very powerful lobbyist in Houston. And furthermore, this lobbyist had a law partner with Baker Botts, and his name was the United States Secretary of State, James Baker III. So there's some powerful people with this law firm. So I was taken off of the case in March of 1989, but I was allowed to do some complaint investigation at night and weekends if I was on duty, and to document any violations, and then to get another investigator to come out with me and kind of confirm it, because the company had accused me of bias because I was writing 50-page violation reports to support how bad the plant was, whereas the lobbyist, Mr. Feldkamp, said he's only used to seeing like 1 or 2-page violation reports, and accused me of writing excessively long reports that were very good. So anyway, over the course of the summer, there were a whole series of complaints at nights and weekends when I was on call. And so I verified, that there were, I believe, violations going on from this plant, including an old incinerator where they were had been damaged, and they were overloading it with waste rubber. And that's what another thing that Mr. Scheibel had informed me about. That, Neil, he said, it's good that you're finding violations with the incinerator, because he said, I'm an electrician. And he said they overload it at night when you don't come out typically, you're not on call. Or it's after normal duty hours. And we're told to, quote, stuff it like a turkey with waste rubber. And the problem is that the incinerator would overheat, and it would melt the wiring, and the incinerator would smoke very badly, and it would smell in the south side of Odessa like somebody was burning rubber tires. So I was able to cite them for several of those violations as well, at night and during the day. So because I was off the case, the agency was in a quandary in the summer of 1989 about whether to send those violations to General Tire and Rubber or not. So they sat on them on my supervisor's desk for weeks and months. And finally, in early September, they decided to dismiss them and throw them away. And so one day I wondered what had happened. They weren't in my inbox. They weren't in my supervisor's inbox. And after everybody left from work on a Friday afternoon, I hung around to see where did those reports end up. And so I found them in my boss's trash can, and I recovered them, because those were Clean Air Act violations. That was really a mess. So some of the other investigators I worked with were in shock when I pulled the reports. I showed them that this is what was thrown away. Well, what
You
happened on that?
actually, just to make sure our listeners and I understand, you actually found them in the circular file, the waste
In the
baskets.
in the trash can. In the trash
Literally in
can.
the circular
Yes.
file in the trash. You
in my
found them.
in my boss's office, okay, after 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and I was shocked, okay.
Yeah.
And what he had done then is he had refilled out the forms for those dates, those investigation dates, and put no violations on them and signed my name.
And isn't that
So
fraud?
well, yeah, but he was under orders. A phone call had come that morning from the headquarters in Austin, from our compliance person, and I'd gone in that morning asking the secretary there if we'd had any phone calls from Austin, and she said, yeah, the main compliance guy called, Bob, and talked to my boss Charlie, and so I said, something's going to happen today, something.
Yeah.
Okay, I could feel it, and they decided to just trash the reports. So
It
what
sounds
I
like
did,
something out of a bad movie.
it was really shocking. I didn't think.
B-rate movie. I mean, if you're going to throw them away, at least throw them away when no one can find them. But they put it in the circular file where you could. Okay, got
Well,
it.
the reports were literally wadded up. They were wadded up and put in the trash can. And my supervisor never told me, okay, didn't tell anybody else. So I'm sure he was not happy about it, okay, because he was actually a good person, a very, very aggressive, and supported my aggressive investigative findings
But he was
for,
under pressure. He was
yeah,
under pressure.
he was following orders to keep me off the case, not issue violations and all that. So anyway, then what happened is I had a couple of friends in Austin in the agency, two guys, Bill Main and Jim Kaler, who both had whistleblower lawsuits against the agency pending in Austin over asbestos illegal removal at the state capitol. And they were under threats of termination, so they had filed whistleblower cases. And so I told them, I said, well, I'm coming to Austin next week for some training. And they said, okay, let's get together. And they basically recommended I go public, which was kind of a very difficult thing to do, but that's what I did. Instead of trying to complain to EPA, Dallas Region 6, or where I knew people, or to talk to people at the Attorney General's office, and I had privately actually sent copies of these reports to a person at the Texas Attorney General's office who I'd been working with for nearly 9 years on legal cases in West Texas. And he had just called me. I sent these as a private citizen, and his response was private. He said, Neil, you do good work. These are good violations.
And I guess what you're trying to say here, so we all understand, is you did go through proper channels.
Well, no. I was going behind the scenes. Okay. I knew a person at the Attorney General's office, and I sent him privately copies of the investigation reports alleging violations. And he simply told me that, well, these look fine to me, but unless the agency sends them over for prosecution by the Attorney General's office, environmental division, he said, I can't do anything. But anyway, so what happened is, I went public in September of 1989 and October. I met with two reporters, which I've rarely talked about, but they came out from the Austin American-Statesman, the state capitol. And they were interested in the information I had. So I gave them copies of these investigation reports that the agency had, basically dismissed and thrown away in the trash can. And also they were able to find a memo in which I was formally removed from the case for no good reason, just that the
they didn't
company,
like what you were saying.
The reports. So that was all documented that I was officially off the case. So these reporters took the information back, and they did meet some citizens in South Odessa. I was not supposed to. I didn't give any names out or their addresses, but I did go by and point houses out where they could go talk to people, okay? And that way I wasn't giving the address out or their name or phone numbers. And these were Black mothers, okay, talking about how horrible their children were getting sick and would miss school because the air pollution from this plant, you know, and so they couldn't tell me, of course, that it was styrene from this synthetic rubber plant. But anyway, so the reporters got a lot of information, and the Austin American Statesman ran a front page co-headline story. I think it was October 6th on a Sunday, 1989. I didn't get to see it for over a day because I was in West Texas. But the title of the story was Air Board removes investigator after polluter complains. And the state agency at the time was the Texas Air Control Board, and today it's the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. So,
and did that turn the tide? Did that story help turn the tide?
Yeah, they interviewed the Black mothers about how their children were getting sick, and the nearby elementary school. And so it really hit the fan. And the agency decided, after a legal review by our attorneys in Austin, that every one of my investigation reports documenting violations at General Tire Rubber were all legally valid, and they were sending them over to the Attorney General's office for prosecution. And so in early December, the guy I know, David Preister, who's retired now from the Texas Attorney General's office, he flew out in early December, and I went down to the courthouse with him to file a state lawsuit against General Tire and Rubber, and we asked for a hearing before a local judge to get a temporary injunction so we could investigate what I alleged to be a heavily damaged incinerator. And the judge granted it, although the company complained it would shut them down, but it didn't really. And very quickly, within a week, not only had we filed a lawsuit, but I was allowed to go back into the plant. And I had been banned from going inside the plant since March of '89. And so when the agency asked me what I really wanted in the case, I said, well, all these violations need to be prosecuted. There were about 50 of them. And then I said, and the West Texas regional office needs to be cleared of the bias innuendo by the the company and their attorneys. And third, I want to be put back on the case. So I had been removed from the case, and the agency granted all those.
Awesome.
Okay.
Awesome. So are we almost, because we've gone over time, are we almost wrapping it up? So that
yeah, so we
back with questions. Okay.
We did go into the plant the next week, and we examined the incinerator with a team of engineers and experts and attorneys. The incinerator never ran again. It was badly damaged. It was cracked and buckled and warped, and they never ran it again. And so, what they had been doing was illegal. And then we wound up, when we sued them, they wound up doing a major audit on the plant and found a lot of problems in there. And so we wound up settling, this large lawsuit for them to do a lot of upgrades and repairs to the plant and to install more pollution control equipment.
That's a fantastic story. And I'm sure there are many more. I'm sure if we had hours and hours, you could tell us lots more.
Yeah. Well, I unfortunately had kind of upset the people at the top of my agency because they looked really bad in the media. And the head of the agency actually resigned about 90 days or so after I had gone public in October. But Neil, anyway,
that's why they get paid the big bucks. So, and your listeners out there, you can't worry about that. It's their jobs.
But I did that. Yeah, I did that because the pollution was horrific, and it was affecting, a community of color in South Odessa, Texas, and I simply was doing my job.
I know. It needed to be done, and there's so many. This story is incredible, and I'm sorry. I know you could go on for another 30 minutes, but there's some things that you discussed that is just so incredibly important. We need to talk about that just a little bit. So right in the beginning, you said something that I hear over and over and over again when I'm interviewing experts such as yourself, that the burden was on the people being harmed for anything to get change, for change to happen. You remember you
Yes,
commented on the
yes.
smell, and they go, well, unless the residents complain, there's nothing we can do. I've heard that so many times, and it shouldn't be that way, but the reality is that's the way it is. And so,
Well,
yeah, you go ahead, and then I'm going to step back in, because what happens is the people don't realize the power that they have. All the power is in their hands to make changes. They just don't know it. Okay.
right, right. But I also was quite aggressive as a state investigator. Okay, that I found the citizens were, almost 100% right in terms of how bad the pollution was, and then it was my job to go in and find where it was coming from and to make a case that it was illegal. And so we cited, even though the plant was heavily grandfathered, we cited General Tire and Rubber for nuisance violations, and that the air was, impacting the public. And that was obvious. And so now, so that's where, as an official, it was up to me and a few investigators that I worked with to recommend these violations for nuisance, even though sometimes investigators that I worked with or around the state might not go that route. Okay, they might not issue any nuisance violations. Okay, basically, nuisance is air pollution that interferes with the use and enjoyment of property. It doesn't have to make you sick. Okay, but anyway, so we were using the power of the state law and the rules and regulations to issue nuisance violations, and some others too. And we were able to sue the company, and we were successful in court. And the company actually then decided they wanted to settle the case because they were looking very bad. The other thing I will say.
So if you're out there and you smell something, my listeners, you smell something, don't wait for Mr. Neil Carman to come to you, because he's not coming. Okay. It was very unusual for someone like Mr. Carman to have a job working for the government. That's unusual for someone like that. And
Well,
they don't stay. They don't stay. They whistle blow, and then you're out. Mr. Carman's not coming. But if you just speak up, then after you speak up, then experts will come. But it is up to you to speak up. It shouldn't be that way. It makes me so angry that that's the way it is. The people suffering, the burden shouldn't be on them to prove they're suffering. But it is, unfortunately. And so I thought it was really important to touch on that. And if you feel like you're alone, you're not alone. It's going on all over the country where people are being harmed, and the burden's on them to speak up about it.
Well, and General Tire and Rubber at the time, they were based in Akron, Ohio, and they were making a tire called General Tires. And they had a TV program called The Dukes of Hazzard that they were heavily involved in sponsoring, that someday you'll own General Tires. And the car on the show was called the General. And the bad publicity from the enforcement actions against their synthetic rubber plant in West Texas basically killed the Dukes of Hazzard program.
I'm so sorry.
They couldn't fund it anymore. Okay,
I'm so
they were
sorry.
looking. They were
that
looking.
Is a win. That is
Yeah,
a win.
yeah,
That is a major
yeah.
win. There's something else you mentioned that it's going on all over the world whenever people are speaking up for the public good, and that is you get attacked and called, oh, you're biased. You're biased. And so what happened there? What happened to you, Neil, and what's happened to other folks out there? And I know that it happened to me. The moment you speak up for the public good, you will be criticized for being biased. And so what's going on, and you see it all the time, is if they don't have a reasonable way to argue with your facts, they attack the person talking. So they attacked you and they attacked me because, you know, we're right. And so you challenge us personally. And the important thing when that happens to you, when you take on the big guys out there, when it happens, the important thing is that you recognize that and don't waste a second of your time defending yourself. Because what's just happened is they're trying to change the subject. They're trying to get off the issue and make it about you. And recognize that that's happening. And every second you spend being defensive is a second wasted because you need to get back on the issue. So what I would suggest is just say, well, you know, sorry you feel that way, but can we get back to the subject, please? Which is this issue. But I'm not surprised that happened to you. They attack you because you're biased. What was your reaction to that? When they said you were biased?
Well,
what did you say?
I simply pretty much had to, my boss said that I was off of the case and, but I could go out there at nights and weekends. So I was on call typically about a week every month. And so we had a choice if we wanted to go out.
But what did, I'm sorry, let me say, Ms. Producer, you can edit this part, but I want to make sure you understood, what was your response to being labeled bias?
Well, there was nothing I could do. I didn't quit.
Good,
there was nothing I could do. Okay. And so there was nothing.
But you recognized that wasn't the issue.
Right.
They couldn't argue with the facts, so they went after you. And there's one other thing that
I was still allowed to go out at nights and weekends if there were complaints. So I did document additional violations through June and July and August. But they weren't being acted on. So that was very disturbing. And it had happened. That had happened to some other investigators I worked with. Another one of the guys was not allowed to go out to a certain plant. They had accused a different lawyer had accused him at that chemical plant of bias. And so anyway.
Yeah, that when they don't have a leg to stand on, they attack the person delivering the message. So, but finally, and this is also crucial. I always like to tell our listeners that don't ever judge yourself by whether or not the media writes about your cause or your efforts or your work. If the media doesn't cover your work, so, okay, fine. I mean, the media must be too busy or it's got something else to do. Nonetheless, if you can get the media to do a story about your work or your cause or your mission, go for it because it's free. And it's a free way to further the reach of your message. And in this particular case, with you, Neil, the media was very helpful, right?
Yes, absolutely. And they also not just interviewed, myself and people in the agency who were supportive of my work, but they also interviewed citizens and they interviewed a plant worker who, Mr. Scheibel, who supported how bad the plant was and all the problems it had. So
fantastic. Well, Neil, is there anything that, any final words you'd like to give to our listeners today to give them encouragement on taking on the big guys in their own neighborhoods?
Well, I think, what the word I heard when I worked in the state agency in Texas was the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So citizens need to make a lot of noise, not just to the regulatory agencies, to local officials, their city councils, their mayors, and so forth. And it really making a lot of noise does make a difference, I believe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. And I've heard that since I was a child, and I'm quite old now. That was a long time ago when I first heard that, but that's very, very true. Words to live by. Thank you, Neil Carman. And I hope all of you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to rate, subscribe, and review this podcast on all of your favorite episodes, on all of your favorite platforms. And remember, no matter who you are, you too can beat the big guys.
Okay. Thank you, Sandy. Goodbye.
Stay with me. No, don't go. Don't go. I'm just going to stop recording for a second.